all know there is no one profile of a violent extremist or terrorist. So there's no way to predict who will become radicalized. Around the world and here in the United States, inexcusable acts of violence have been committed against people of different faiths, by people of different faiths, which is, of course, a betrayal of all our faiths. It's not unique to one group or to one geography or one period of time.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are proud to once again welcome in, and I'm thrilled to once again say hello to the great Donald Rumsfeld, former Defense Secretary of the United States, and of course author of a great book, Rumsfeld's Rules, Leadership Lessons in Business, Politics, War, and Life. There it is on your TV screen. Hello, Mr. Secretary.
Well, greetings. How are you?
Good. It's so good to talk to you again, sir. Thank you for joining us.
You bet. I'm delighted to be with you.
All right, well, let's talk about what you just heard from President Obama and what you've been hearing over the past 2 days, really doubling down on the notion that this is not an Islamic terror. They're not Islamic. Everybody does it. It's not unique to one group. You can't determine who's going to become a terrorist. As you sit and listen to all of this taking place, what are you thinking?
Well, I'm disappointed. I think that the administration seems to be in somewhat of a state of denial. The reality is, if people attack a Jewish deli, and if they desecrate cemeteries with Christians and Jews buried there, and if they undertake and say the things they're saying and chop off people's heads because they're Christians, it's pretty clear where the violence is being directed. Now, to be sure, a lot of Muslims get killed when someone straps a bomb on themselves and goes into a shopping center or a restaurant and blows themselves up. But this is a collection of people who are determined to promote their ideology, and they're Muslims. They're not a majority of the Muslims, but they're a non-trivial fraction that are engaging in these god-awful acts. And I think to pretend that's not the case is utter nonsense.
How much harm does the president do to the effort to defeat this by taking this approach, in your view?
Well, there's a great many things that have been done that weaken our ability to do what needs to be done. If you don't properly identify the enemy, and in this case, it's obviously Islamists and radicals of the Muslim faith who are determined to attack the very fundamental thing that stabilizes the world, namely the nation state. They want to end the nation-state concept and impose a caliphate, and to pretend that it's random, or to pretend that it's, in the case of the Fort Hood attack, workplace violence, is to deny the truth and to be unwilling to identify the enemy. And unless you do that, unless you do identify the enemy, people can't begin to do all the things that are going to be necessary if we're going to be able to protect the American people and preserve our way of life.
If people are trying to make analogies between the tiptoeing around calling it Islamic terror of Obama and the words and actions of George W. Bush. I think towards the end, especially, I mean, if I may, under Condoleezza Rice, I think George W. Bush did shy away and weaken on calling it what it is. But is there a comparison or an analogy to be made between how Barack Obama is dealing with this now and how George W. Bush dealt with it when he was president?
Well, I think any leader is going to be concerned about managing their affairs in a way that they don't seem to be against a religion, because we aren't against a religion as a country. We're against terrorists, and we're against Islamists who are using their religion and perverting their religion to attract people and money and go out and kill innocent people in an attempt to impose their radical views on the world. Now, did President Bush worry about being seen as against a religion? Sure, any leader would be. But the idea that you deny the very reality of what we're dealing with, it's been taken to a level that I never imagined anyone would with respect to this administration.
If you were defense secretary for President Obama, I mean, I could assume, first of all, you'd resign. Is that fair to say? If you were sitting there as defense secretary and you were sitting there during this summit and you heard and saw all these things, you couldn't operate under that kind of circumstance as defense secretary, could you?
You know, you think this president has a couple more years to go, and one would think that it would be a big help if a group of the cabinet got together, and maybe even some of the White House staff, and went down and sat down with the president in the Oval Office and said, look, you were elected president, we understand that, and we're here to serve you, and we understand that, but this isn't working. What we're doing is damaging the country. We are creating a vacuum. And, Mr. President, we honestly believe that we can't afford to create a vacuum, because it's going to be filled by people who are against us and against our values. And we're here to ask you to change direction. And here's what we recommend. I would hope someone would do that.
Do you have anybody in mind particular, or just in general?
No, it's got to be people that he's picked and people he has confidence in.
Right.
And it's pretty clear to me that he's picked people who, for the most part, agree with him.
Let me ask you, Mr. Secretary. Rudy Giuliani was at an event yesterday where Scott Walker was being honored at a function at the 21 Club here in New York, and Rudy Giuliani is quoted as saying that he doesn't believe Barack Obama loves America as he does, and in general. Do you agree with that?
Well, I don't know that I agree or disagree. I think as anyone, I think I'd phrase it in my own words, and I think that anybody who believes that America needs to be apologized for in the world and spends their time with a world tour apologizing to people, and anyone who believes that the United States deserves to be blamed for things that are going on in the world, and anyone who thinks that by leading from behind or backing up, that the world leadership will be somehow better than having the United States step forward and provide leadership and be proud of our values and proud of our country. Now, no country's perfect, but I think it's fair to say that this president apparently believes, or acts like he believes in any rate, that there are others in the world who would provide better leadership than our country. And I don't quite understand who he thinks that is, because what happens when the president steps back, and what happens when the president creates that vacuum, nature abhors a vacuum, and it gets filled by people who don't believe what we believe and are trying to move the country in a direction that is going to be damaging not just to us, but to people who value freedom and recognize the role of women in the world. I mean, that part of the world is in difficulty, and that's to be sure. And as somebody said, there's no question but that there are people that are poor and people that are out of jobs. But my golly, any part of the world that decides they're going to limit the role of women has to expect that they're not going to be as successful as the rest of the part of the world.
Under your definition, anybody that leads from behind and thinks someone could lead better, anybody who believes that you need to apologize for America, go on an apology tour. So you were describing obviously Barack Obama. So do you think if it's not fair to say, as Rudy did, that he doesn't love America, what is it fair to say? I mean, that he has a different take on America. How would you describe a man who does all the things you just said? You just defined.
I think it's a stunning lack of leadership that is going to cost America greatly in time, in dollars, and I hope not in blood. It is a signal that's being set out across the globe that the United States has stepped back and is anxious to have someone else provide the kind of standards and leadership and example that we feel will make for a better world. I mean, who do they expect to do that? The European Union's not doing it. Mr. Putin is filling a vacuum and stepping into Ukraine, and one has to wonder what's next. Is it going to be Central Asia or the Baltics, or where? Where is he going to feel that he no longer is deterred or dissuaded from imposing his views?
Let me ask you one more issue. Actually, they're the same issue, but the relationship and the treatment of Benjamin Netanyahu. Do you believe that the Prime Minister has should be coming to the United States and speaking before the Congress? And do you believe the Obama administration is taking this too far?
Well, the United States has had a very healthy, strong relationship with Israel. Since President Harry Truman first recognized Israel as a state. And the relationship between the United States and Israel today is probably as bad as ever in my adult lifetime. And it is a shame because it is a country that is small, it's embattled, it's got neighbors that wish it weren't there, and they face a growing threat from Iran. A nuclear Iran would dramatically change things in that part of the world. And I would add that Congress is a separate and co-equal branch of government. They ought to be able to invite people to come and speak there, which they do. I was a former member, and I see nothing wrong with that. I think that the conscious decision by this administration to create a difficult and strained and tense relationship between the executive branch of the government and the State of Israel is a big mistake. And it is not in our interest, and it's not in Israel's interest, and I would add it's not in the region's interest.
And what about an agreement with Iran? Do you believe Iran could be trusted, sir?
Well, I haven't seen anything that would lead me to believe that. The kinds of inspections that would be necessary, one has to imagine, are not going to be permitted. And the delays, the continued progress they're making towards the development of nuclear weapons suggest to me that it would be advantageous for the United States to listen to Prime Minister Netanyahu. He lives in the neighborhood. They have threatened to eradicate the country, to shove it into the sea. The Iranians have, and his interest is paramount. And it seems to me that we would benefit by hearing from him.
Mr. Secretary, I got to tell you, keep talking and keep your voice out there. It's a very important voice in a very troubled and scary time, and I can't thank you enough for spending all this time with us, sir. Thank you so much.
Happy to do it. Good to be with you.
Thank you. Former Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, ladies and gentlemen. And I really mean that. It's very important to get this perspective, that George W. Bush doesn't speak out on these kinds of things. because he doesn't feel it's an ex-president's place to speak about your successor. And I respect that very much. But Donald Rumsfeld. And get the book, Rumsfeld's Rules, Leadership, Lessons in Business, Politics, and War. You talk about war. We got a debate coming up next. Don't miss it. Dinesh D'Souza and David Swerdling.